Okay, so I am live. Thank you all so much for coming. Had a massive turnout tonight, which is really, really good. If you can see me, just pop a message in the chat roll just to say you can see me, you can hear me, everything's coming through loud and clear. If you can't, just keep refreshing the page. Yeah, keep refreshing. Yes, you can see me and hear me. Amazing. Yeah, that was stressful. It wasn't allowing me to log into Google Hangouts for some reason, which was very strange. So we have exactly 15 minutes because in 15 minutes time, I've got to switch over and do the Q&A for the September intake. So I've got to go get all set up for that because I'm juggling both of y'all tonight. So questions, pop them in the chat roll. We will start. Who was it? It was Teresa, I believe it was, asked how I implement refeeds with clients in the context of improving adherence, but not impacting fat loss. So it's a really good question. So to not impact on fat loss or weight loss, you've basically got to set it up so that over the course of a week, a client is in a calorie deficit. So if they're in a calorie deficit over the course of the week, or longer, if you're doing a longer cycle of stuff, you can do that. But either way, over that period of time, they need to be in a calorie deficit overall. So to that end, what you can do is add up their maintenance calorie intake daily for a week. So basically take their maintenance calorie intake and times it by 7, and you get their maintenance weekly calorie intake. And you can then slash that by however much you want, depending roughly how much weight you want them to lose. And for that, you can go off the whole 3,500 calorie equals a pound rule. Tends to work relatively well unless you want to lose a whole bunch of weight. But for roughly kind of 1 to 2 pounds a week, it tends to work out relatively well, provided that people, of course, are compliant with it. So then you can get the total weekly calorie intake that's going to give them a calorie deficit over the course of that week. And then with regards to compliance, you can then set that up so they have high days and low days, or you can set it up so they have kind of periods of refeeding, so kind of 3 days of higher calories and the other 4 days of lower calories. If it's just from a psychological benefit, I'll cover more on the whole non-linear dieting thing, so kind of calorie cycling and carb cycling in the in module 1.5. So that's how I tend to implement them. I have kind of high days and low days, and I put them on the days that they are depends on the client. I mean, for some clients, I've given them a fair amount of autonomy over it, and I've said you should have 3 high days and 4 low days a week. You split them up how you want to, and I've let them kind of find their own kind of way on that. And if they kind of really, really cock them up, so they have their 4 low days on their training days and their really intense training days, and then they wonder why their training is terrible, then I can turn around and say, well, it may be an idea to put some more carbs on your training days for some reason. Or you can prescribe them a little bit more. So you say, right, I want your high days on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and et cetera, et cetera. So that's how I tend to implement refeeds with people, or I say refeeds, kind of non-linear dieting. Craig, yeah, you will. On the overview page that you saw, if you click on the unit, the replay will be uploaded into there. Excuse me if I'm sorry if you heard that. I'm like I said, my throat was ridiculous this morning and my nose is starting to go. Question: how do artificial flavorings impact on hunger levels? That's a good one. Artificial sweeteners don't tend to do a huge amount necessarily. Artificial flavorings, I will have to look that up. But what I can say now is that it's probably more appropriate to look at the food as a whole rather than the specific flavorings within it that are going to give you, decreased or increased satiety. So protein powders, for example, are artificially flavored most of the time. If you incorporate them into some form of protein baking, for example, if you include some other foods, a lot of protein baking uses beans as a base. I know there's some kind of bean brownie things. Then obviously that's going to give you some more fiber, that's going to give you some more food volume, stuff like that. All of the stuff that's going to contribute to satiety, whereas 1 scoop of protein in water probably isn't going to give you as much satiety at all. So again, it's probably better to look at the foods themselves rather than specific ingredients. But I will look that up. Pop a question in the Facebook group as well, just to remind me, tag me in it. So yeah. Oh, by the way, on that note, if you do have questions about this stuff that you forget to ask during the Q&A or whatever, then please don't message me on Facebook. It's not a I don't want you to talk to you kind of thing. It's more that I get quite a lot of messages anyway. I tend to not reply to most of them. So the most reliable way of getting hold of me is to tag me in a group. So the Academy point, I can answer your question publicly, which is going to help other people as well, because other people may have the same question. If you think that your question is, you're embarrassed to ask a question, there are no stupid questions. I'm going to say that now. Certainly not within the confines of the Academy group. What goes on in there stays in there. But if you aren't comfortable asking a question publicly, then email it to me, lawrence@shreddedbyscience.com. Drop me an email and I will either reply with the answer, or what I may do is, if I think it's a question that lots of people can learn from, I will answer it in the group, but obviously I will keep you out of it. I will keep the question sort of anonymous. So Jen asked, would refeeds be needed if someone is not training, i.e. recovering or sick, normally trained but taking a prolonged break? No. At that point, I would look to be tailoring the nutrition, or kind of putting in place guidelines to help recovery as opposed to refeeding. At that point, calorie intake becomes something to either worry a lot about, depending on the recovering or sick. If it's a case of someone's got 3rd-degree burns on lots of their body, then yeah, their calorie intake becomes vitally important, as does their protein intake, as does things like glutamine and all of that sort of stuff. But if someone has a bit of a cold, like I'm currently experiencing, then it's a case of, a lot of the time I say to clients, look, your priority is to get better, not to, at this point, maximize training recovery, because your recovery is going to suck anyway if you're ill, by and large. The amount of volume you're going to need to kind of induce the same amount of stress, training stress, is going to be vastly decreased. So at that point, I just say to clients, look, eat what you want. It's, generally speaking, an illness will last a few days, possibly a week at most. Clients will either go, eat significantly less or eat a little bit more. And generally, I find that it tends to balance out. It tends to kind of, any weight that they lose or gain over the course of that illness tends to come back pretty quickly. So I don't tend to worry too much about that, obviously depending on the illness itself. Ulysses, similar to Jennifer's question, would you increase your calories or simply refeeds if you are in a very stressed state and training? If you're in a very stressed state and training, I would generally speaking look at training itself. I would tend to keep nutrition to. That's a really good question, and what I'm doing is I'm just trying to make sure that I don't ramble on, and I want to give you a concise answer. So, with regards to nutrition, I would set in place guidelines that are going to give the client either the structure they need to stick to, solid nutrition, or I would give them a bit more flexibility with regards to their nutrition. It's what's going to stress them out least, because what we don't want to be doing is adding to that stress if they're already really stressed. I wouldn't go refeeds. I wouldn't go non-linear at this point. Again, I will cover all of this in the later module, purely because if someone's really stressed, they probably don't want to be having to put mental energy into, right, well, how much am I actually eating today? What have I got to hit today? It's different from yesterday. If I can give them a consistent calorie intake and consistent macronutrient intake, I will do. However, I would look at their training as well. Maybe is it time to have a bit of a deload? Something like that, take the training stress down a little bit, get them maybe doing some more green activity, which has been shown to reduce stress levels, so get them walking outside, stuff like that. If someone is really, really stressed and trying to train really, really hard and trying to do non-linear dieting and all the rest of it, it's kind of a recipe for disaster. And I don't like to do that whenever possible. At times, it's going to be unavoidable. For example, if a client has a bodybuilding show or a powerlifting meet to do, which again, I'm going to discuss in Eric and Mike's modules. But whenever possible, I would look to reduce that stress. So, anybody got any more questions in that part in the last 5 minutes? So, had a discussion with Mike Samuels about underconsumption and metabolic adaptation. Is this a protocol you'd work through with a client who seems to be consuming massively low calories? What protocol are you referring to? Are you referring to kind of the whole reverse dieting thing? So gradually adding back in carbs and fats, Jen? Is that what you're referring to? Because if so, then yeah, okay. So if you've not listened to the debate between Eric Meno Lane and Peter Fitchen, I would highly recommend checking that out. I believe someone's already shared it in the Academy group. I go and watch that. It's about an hour and a half long. That basically, that's my, I agree with Eric and Meno and their kind of position on the whole reverse dieting thing. However, when it comes to someone who seems to be consuming massively low calories, I tend to try and ascertain whether they are scared of consuming higher calories, or whether they are, thank you, Jono, whether they are literally just underreporting without knowing about it. If they are trying to eat ridiculously low calories because they're scared about gaining weight, yet are kind of binging on the weekends, then what you can do, and what I have done, I've done it with a couple of people, so I'm not claiming to have a whole wealth of experience with this, but adding in kind of calories and carbs and fats and something like that over the course, it takes about 3 or 4 weeks of gradually bumping on that calorie intake. You have to start at an intake that's kind of low enough for them to not freak out about it, but then at the same time is high enough that they can consistently stick to it for about a week without binging, gradually ramping that up to a level that's going to get them losing fat at a slightly more sustainable rate, maybe, or losing weight at a more sustainable rate. And what this will do is they will appear to be eating progressively more, but because they are eating consistent amounts across the course of a week, but it's quite low relative to what their actual maintenance is, they will lose quite a bit of weight over the first few weeks. So you get this whole I'm eating more but I'm losing weight thing. Again, I've had that with a couple of clients, and it seems to have worked quite well. But again, that's just a thing. Oh, wow. So, okay, I've got time for one more question. So if you've got any other questions, put them in the Facebook group and we'll get around to answering them then. So I have got to pick Charlie, Charlotte, or Rory. Right, Charlotte and Charlie, you pop your questions in the Facebook group, as anyone else. For Rory, for little people having to eat really low calories, I'm going to answer this one because I have a client who is 4'9" and 49 kilos and has to eat really low calories. How do I deal with that? You put them on really low calories. If they've got to eat really low calories, then that's what they've got to eat in order to achieve their goals. But at that point, satiety becomes like hugely important, as important as anyone else who is eating calories that he's eating that many calories, or that few calories rather. So at that point, you have to really start to get a handle on their fiber intake, their fluid intake, their caffeine intake, if they find that caffeine helps reduce hunger, stuff like that. So it's there's nothing kind of hugely special about it. You just have to really drill home to them that if they want kind of more junky food, then going out for one meal for them, like when my small client is dieting, she'll be dieting on kind of 1,200 calories. She makes weight for powerlifting meat, so she'll be dieting on really low calories. If she goes out for a burger, and kind of goes for burger with all the trimmings plus a dessert, that's 2 days worth of food for her. So she has to really bear that in mind. So it becomes a little more difficult in terms of food choices, and also in terms of you have to really prioritize satiety, kind of more so than bigger people who are dieting. So that is it for tonight. Thank you all so much for coming. There was a massive turnout. And yeah, let's keep that up. I hope you all enjoyed it. Any more questions, pop them in the Facebook group, and I will get around to answering them.